Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
We're most pleased to bring you the program today, and it's a very, very interesting topic. It has to do with life in Iran, and particularly what's happened in relation to the environment. Our distinguished guest today spent 6 weeks there putting together a documentary, and it's very, very well done. We welcome to the program Marcia Franklin. She is a producer and host of the program Dialogue on the Idaho Public Television stations, and she does a great job with that and interviewing people on all kinds of subjects. She has spent the past 15 years as producer and host at Idaho Public Television. Before that, 1 year in Idaho Falls with NBC affiliate, and then before that, in communications in San Francisco. So she comes to us with great credentials in not only analyzing but also producing on important subjects. Marcia, we thank you so much for being here, and we certainly appreciate all that you do in the field of communications.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. I've enjoyed your show for years.
Thank you very much. Likewise with you. And I'm very pleased to have two panelists today. First of all is Judy Meyer, who is a member of the Board of Trustees at North Idaho College, and prior to that was chair of the board for a period of time with the Idaho Board of Education. Judy, welcome, and thank you.
It's great to work with.
You're a great supporter of public television.
Yeah, and work with Marcia as well.
Yes, and also always our regular panelist, Erna Reinhardt, who's Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start the questioning, thanks to the graciousness of Marcia, we have 4 small clips all in together that we're going to air from her documentary, and then we're going to talk to her about her trip to Iran. At this time, we will show those clips.
The next day, it was out and about. Tehran is a massive city. Estimates put the population at 12 million, and most of those arrived in the last 25 years, particularly during the Iran-Iraq War. It's noisy, crowded, and air polluted, but it would have to be my base for the next 6 weeks. I was also disturbed by the pollution. For instance, Isfahan was supposed to be the most beautiful city in Iran, but as we drove in, day turned to night because of the smog. All you could see from this tourist site, the shaking minarets, was a haze. The air had a sick, sweet smell from the factories. I wondered what the school children were breathing, not to mention me. Vice President Masumi Aptekar is the head of Iran's Department of Environment.
We need to create over 800,000 jobs every year. On the other hand, we have natural resources and an environment which is already very fragile, already overexploited in many areas. So this is a very, I think, it's a difficult challenge to be able to strike that balance.
Even 10 years. I wanted to know what Mrs. Ebadi hoped for her country in the midst of such tremendous change.
اگر قرار بشه من رویاهام رو بیان بکنم.
If I am to express my dream is an Iran free of violence, an Iran where everyone can live as he wants, think as he wants, and work as he wants.
می اندیشه و کار میکنه.
My dream is an Iran where the natural wealth is distributed fairly. My dream is an Iran run by trusted representatives of the people.
رویای من ایرانی است که به وسیله نمایندگانی که
My dream is a free and proud Iran.
رویای من ایران آزاد و سرفرازه.
I asked her what she thought was the best way to promote peace.
صلح و اعتقاد به صلح چیزی نیست که یک شبه
Peace and the belief in peace is not something to be created overnight. It needs cultural reconstruction. The most important thing is that we raise our children from an early age far from violence.
The last part of that clip was an attorney in Iran who won the Nobel Peace Prize, and very very great that Marcia could have that interview. With that, we'll turn to Judy Meyer for the first question.
Thank you, Tony. Welcome, Marcia, and
Judy.
thanks for your good work. Probably the first thing to understand is how did you get to be in Iran and do the production? How does one fund such an activity?
Well, it's a really good question because, of course, these things don't come cheap, and time doesn't come cheap either.
And you live in Idaho, so how'd you get there?
What happened was I applied for and received something called a Pew Fellowship in International Journalism. It's now called the International Reporting Project. It has a little bit of a different name. It's associated with the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C. And every year, a few journalists are picked for this fellowship in the hopes that local reporters, just like me, will become better educated in international subjects. So I sent a proposal in to go to Iran to study the environmental movement. I knew it would be so difficult to get into that country that I also sent them a substitute proposal to go to Kazakhstan to look at the nuclear, anti-nuclear movement there, which is run in particular by women. And although it was a great story, I'm really glad I didn't have to go there in the winter because it's very cold. Anyway, I received the fellowship, and the fellowship provides one with a stipend. Not a large one, but enough to pay for your air ticket and hotels and things like that, and videotape. And I borrowed a camera. I hadn't used a camera before. Usually I'm the one on the other side of the camera. And set about for 6 weeks, my first 6 weeks in D.C., negotiating a visa to get into Iran. Then being successful at that, another 6 weeks in Iran, and then another 3 weeks back in D.C. trying to begin to put my story together. Then once I got back to Idaho, I worked a lot of nights and weekends and put together this documentary, which has since aired on a number of PBS stations around the country.
Could I follow up on that then with your experience in being there? Were there any supervision of you or direction of what should be filmed or not be filmed, or people who come to visit?
It's really interesting what happened, and I've talked to other people who've been to Iran. Normally you do have a government monitor. Now that's not to say that there weren't people listening in on my phone conversations potentially or somehow monitoring what I was doing. Mm-hmm. But I had negotiated my visa with a man in Washington, D.C. I should say that because we've had no diplomatic relations with Iran since 1979, there is no embassy. There's no Iranian embassy in this country, but there's something called an interest section, which is associated with the Embassy of Pakistan in Washington, D.C. And I negotiated my visa with a gentleman who believes very much in what's called the dialogue among civilizations. And this was something that Bill Clinton and President Khatami, former President Khatami of Iran, put together to try and bridge a little bit of the gap that had been caused by the hostage crisis in 1979. And I explained to this gentleman that I really was interested in looking at the environmental movement in Iran, nothing else. And although, as you can see from the clips, other things did happen, but I didn't plan those things. And he trusted me, and I did not have a government monitor when I was there. However, you are not allowed to film in public places there. Anyone, Iranian or non-Iranian. And so the scenes that you saw, some of the street scenes you saw, were the only scenes that I actually had to hire somebody to get footage of. Because the few times I did try to pull out my camera in a public place, I was stopped by police, and in one instance they threatened to actually take it away. And I was followed back, just taking still photographs at one point of an anti-American demonstration, followed back to my hotel. And fortunately the manager negotiated with the policeman or he was an undercover person, that they didn't take my camera. So I got really lucky. I really feel like there was almost an angel on my shoulder. That being said, the Iranian people are wonderful, and 99.9% of them are not going to, want to do anything.
So you were by yourself.
I was by myself, yes.
It must have been a phenomenal experience, Marcia, to be in the country when the Nobel Peace Prize for that individual was announced. Share with us that experience. I know that in the documentary there's some footage about at the airport when she is about to arrive. Yes. Share with us both the reaction of the country and the government and your reaction to that.
It was, and this is one of these kind of fortuitous, can't plan it events. Shireen Ebadi, who, as Tony mentioned, is an attorney in Iran, well known for her work in the human rights arena, won the Nobel Peace Prize. She happened to be in Paris, France when that was announced, and she happened to fly back to Iran the second day that I was there. And so a man that I had been speaking with said, "Do you want to go to the airport?" Being naive and everything, of course, and it's a news story, I said, "Of course, I'll go." And I was all of a sudden in this crowd that was so big that traffic stopped on the highway, and probably at least 10,000 people were there mobbing the airport, wanting her to see her come out. And it was an amazing, amazing scene. They kept moving her from terminal to terminal, and I just missed seeing Mrs. Ebadi personally, but in a way, the event of seeing all the Iranian people massed to meet her, holding signs that say, "Iran is for peace. Wow. This is the true Iran," was to me just as moving because of the images that we typically hear coming out of Iran. And as I mentioned in my documentary, a thread throughout my documentary is Shireen Ebadi, because on the plane over there, we watched footage of her getting the announcement. Then there was that rally. And then at the end of the documentary, as you saw from Tony's clip, this magical moment where a person from Idaho emailed me and said, "A friend of mine's mother plays cards with Shireen Ebadi's mother in Tehran, Iran. Perhaps she can help you get an interview." And a couple days before I left Iran, I managed to get in to see Mrs. Ebadi, who was very stressed out at that time. She has so much pressure on her from her country people and police protection. And did it, set up the camera and was just, I was like, "Oh, I hope it works," and had a girl next to me who kind of did a rudimentary translation for me, and then, talked to her for about half an hour. So it was a thread that went all the way through that, and I consider myself very fortunate to have met her.
Excellent.
I'm going to stress what you went there for, and that is to look at the environmental question. That's one of your interests, and you've done other things in that area. As I watched your documentary, it was overwhelming to me the number of automobiles that's growing, and that they had leaded instead of unleaded gasoline until recently. So just take a few minutes, Marcia, to tell us about what you learned, and that's just an example, and also when you talked to the vice president who's in charge of the environmental department, how serious is this issue in Iran?
Well, one can never know until a government releases its own statistics, what the truth really is. And as we know from our own country and the problems we had with air pollution before the Clean Air Act and things, there will probably be cancers appear in that country from the massive amount of pollution. So we don't yet know how severe it is. But just to give folks a little bit of background, when the religious government took over Iran after 1979, one of the things that they requested of their population was to populate, was to make babies, particularly during the Iran-Iraq War, when they were losing so many of their boys in the war. So people complied, and they had too many children. And as a result, we see something between 60-70% of the population is under the age of 30, which is a problem for the government now, both in many ways, politically, because the young people are clamoring for changes, but also, of course, environmentally. There's too many people. And they have to make jobs for these people. They have to make products for these people. So you have a lot of steel mills that are, places look like Pittsburgh used to look, with the dark sky. So a lot of this is the consequence of too many people. That being said, Iran now is considered a leader in population planning because they recognize that around the mid-90s that they had this huge problem on their hands. So they actually have a condom factory in this Muslim country, and they have free vasectomies and lots of other initiatives now to put a bit of a damper on that population issue. But it's there now. And so everywhere you go, you see the evidence of this problem, whether it's in the air or the water, or if you walk out into the woods, you see people have dumped trash everywhere. And it's exacerbated by the problem that they closed down their universities for quite a while after the Iran-Iraq, during and after the war. So there is no institutional memory among the environmentalists, many of whom were trained by our people in the 1970s. There's no institutional memory, and there's been no research on advancements and things like that. And our embargo, I'm sure, does not
help any in terms of getting equipment and things in terms of pollution monitoring. So it is a very difficult place to breathe.
In your documentary, there was a section that we didn't show that was very, I guess I would call it tragic and sad, is that there were young people that were even wearing some breathing mask. And the one young woman that you interviewed talking about how that's affecting her and other people's health.
Yes, it is. And if I have had, there were several gaps I had in my documentary, because of course I was running around by myself just in 6 weeks, and people are not on the same kind of time schedule we are there. I was there during Ramadan, this time of year, which is a very difficult time to make appointments. And I wish I had done more work with some physicians, talking to them about the direct consequences, asthma and things like that, of the air. But you're right, people are having a hard time breathing. The woman that you mentioned in your question and that we saw in the clip, Masumi Ebtekar, who was the vice president in charge of the Department of Environment, the only woman in Islamic government there, was trying to work on that issue. There's been a governmental change now, and she's no longer in office. But the interesting thing about her was she was a revolutionary. She was the spokesperson for the hostage takers in 1979. So part of the reason that I did choose the environment as a topic was because I knew that I wanted to try and talk with her as well. What an interesting woman. You saw her in the full chador. She was a revolutionary, and she's now considered a moderate as time has gone by. And so she was trying to work on those issues, but by her own admission, completely overwhelmed.
Thank you. Judy?
As we think about the environment and the issues you were looking at, Orion is the second to the country. Where it's located, the kind of environment that's there, is it the desert sense, or the scene had mountains in it?
Yes.
Tell us a bit about first where it is and then the composition of it.
Well, the joke about Iran is it's between Iraq and a hard place, meaning the country of Iraq and Afghanistan. Iran is between those two countries, also bordered on by Turkey on the northwest corner, and Azerbaijan in the north, and Turkmenistan in the northeast corner. Below it, there's water, and then across the Persian Gulf is the United Arab Emirates, and on the right-hand side, here I am speaking, on the east side is Pakistan and some very
that would be mountainous area then, if I pictured that right.
And Iran looks amazingly like Idaho. Amazingly like Idaho. I mean, sometimes I had to kind of shake myself. The southern part of it is desert, just like the south part of our state. It has a central mountain range, just like we do. And the northern part of it, it contains forests and lakes, just like Idaho. It was eerie how similar it was. And in fact, Iranians who have come to this part of the country, or Afghan people, are also very amazed at the similarities between the two countries. And Afghanistan also it's obviously next to Iran. So it's in the middle of all these countries, in a linchpin country for our relations with the Middle East.
And therefore, from the environmental point of view, is Iran ahead of and leading the way to deal with these issues? Because you said you see them realizing they need to, or are they behind in relationship to their neighbors, so that you can't do this all in isolation? It's the village.
On environmental issues, they're trying to play catch up. But all the countries in that area of the world, their priority is feeding their people, and so environment comes after that. And so I don't know exactly how they'd be considered in relation to other countries. Probably, woefully enough, all of them have these type of issues.
I would see that leading then even to the prenatal issues of health care, which weaves into the environment, and it sounds like you were visiting with folks about that as well.
Yeah, some of the people that I met over by the Turkmenistan border are involved in family planning, population planning. I would say Iran is probably ahead of the curve on that issue, certainly as it relates to other Muslim countries. They speak more openly about those issues than one would see in places like Saudi Arabia. And I think it's important to mention to people that the Persian culture is not an Arab culture. And if there was anything that seemed to bind Iranians together, it was their mutual dislike of Arabs. Iran is about 3% Arab, it's mostly the folks that live down south near Iraq and near the Persian Gulf. But the rest of Iran is not of Arab ethnicity. And they take, in some instances, great pride in that. You know, it's just one of those vagaries of the culture. But the Persian culture is fascinating. Food, music, long, rich history of Persian culture.
Arnold Reinhardt.
The irony that I see is that in the country of Iran, in the Constitution, they have a protection clause about the environment, which is something that we don't even have here in the United States. So, and those pictures are real disturbing because it just looks like it would be painful to breathe that air compared to what we have. We're so used to having all of these standards. But also in your documentary, not everything is doom and gloom. There are some good things that are happening. There are some people that are focusing on environmental education. Share with our viewers some of the things. I know one of the things you mentioned was up in northern Iran where they're doing a recycling program. Share with us some of that.
There are, and I'm glad you mentioned that because my intent was really to focus on the positive. I mean, mention what the concerns are, but show the people that are trying to make a difference, because most of the images that Americans have of Iranians is marching in the streets or terrorists or mullahs preaching death to America. In fact, there are many, many people there who don't have those intentions or interests at all and are working on community projects. The environmental projects that I saw were very small and localized. They are just now getting together more of a national environmental movement. It's really been damaged over the years. And so you're right, I saw a recycling project, I saw projects in terms of tree planting. There was a man on an island I visited who's trying desperately to catalog all the species on that island before they go extinct. He's also trying to educate people about trash issues and pollution issues. So there were many localized programs, small programs of people doing good things, with money coming in from other governments besides the United States. Japan, for instance, is heavily involved in the air pollution issue, in providing air pollution monitoring equipment and in working on those issues.
Because what you've said today concerning this incredible increase in population and this really serious environmental concerns, if they don't get control of some of this, they face some really serious consequences as a nation state in the future, don't they?
I would assume so. I mean, China instituted its, for better or for worse, we may not agree with it, but they certainly recognized that they had a population issue a long time ago. And we see now, with more and more Chinese even being able to buy cars, people are getting nervous about what that's going to do to the environment
What
over
does
there.
to the price of gasoline, too, around the world, supply and demand.
Exactly. So Iran has that same situation, and many people are trying to get out of that country. Yeah. Not just because of a political situation, but because it is so difficult to find a job there and to live there. It's just a constant, there's traffic and there's pollution. Out in the countryside, not as much.
Mm-hmm. We don't want the show to end without talking a little bit about the segment of your documentary dealing with the Nobel Peace Prize laureate. And she's an attorney, as we said, and you've already explained how you got an interview with her. Give us a little insight. She really focused on something, saying, in relation to her country and other countries too, that it has to deal with the culture, it has to deal with cultural change. Mention a little more about that, and secondly, is she in political trouble?
Well, Mrs. Ebadi, by her own admission, is often scared. Even with protection from her own government, there are errant people who could try and do something to her. I think what she mentions is what we hear all over the world in terms of violence, that it starts at home, it starts in the community. And, she, not just in Iran, but all over, probably this is an uphill battle sometimes now. But clearly in a country that has had one revolution and is the tension you can just feel. I was back there in May, May, and that was 2 years after my first visit. You could just feel the tension there. Clearly, it's important that people try not to take up arms against each other. So she's probably trying to send that message as well.
I was also thinking about the fact that with this recent election, the mayor of Tehran winning the presidency, it's really more of a shift back to the right. They're already very much to the right, but the moderates were surprised in this election. So 2 points. One, does that endanger her more? Or you also give an explanation to me why some people were surprised at the results of that.
Of the election?
Yes.
Yes, when I was there in May, which was just a few weeks before the election in June, I never heard mention of the mayor of Tehran as a potential winner of the presidency. He did win. People were thinking that it would be Rafsanjani, who used to be president, or perhaps Mouin, who was a reformist candidate. And so people were taken by surprise. And, the jury's out on what will happen. Recently, Rafsanjani and Khamenei, who's the grand supreme leader, have tried to consolidate a little bit more of their power over him. So we'll see. Time will tell what's happening. As far as Shireen Ebadi, I can't predict whether she's under any more or less danger because of the new government. When you win the Nobel Peace Prize, I guess one hopes that it's kind of a little bit of an armor, a little bit of a shield for yourself, that people won't mess with you as much. So I would think that she's pretty sick. She comes to America and speaks, not infrequently. So she's been allowed in and out. So one would think that she still has some protection even under this new regime.
You also indicated in your documentary that they were not honoring her, the government wasn't. That I think it has to do with the fact of her advocating change. So in most countries, you'd be highly honored for such an award. We're just running out of time, Marcia, and I do want to say, though, that your documentary, which has already aired, will air again on Idaho Public Television on December the 6th at 9 p.m.
That's right. Thank you for mentioning that.
Pacific and Mountain Time.
Right.
And I want to again congratulate you for this work you do, not only that, but others. I wish we had time. Another thing you're interested in is a human rights issue in Idaho, and some documentary on that. So we'd like to have you back at another time when you deal with all of that, and give our best to all of our friends at your station. And we wish you really great luck in what you're doing, and thank you for coming to Coeur d'Alene and spending this time with us.
Thank you very much, and I encourage people to learn more about the country of Iran. It will only be in the news more. So it's a fascinating country, fascinating culture and people.
It affects us all, what happens in the Middle East.
Absolutely affects us all.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be with us again next week at this same time, and we will turn to get another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.